Good afternoon. Look, I had to pop on here and I want to encourage you with this word that God led me to on yesterday. And He led me to Exodus, the 16th chapter. And I want to encourage you to be grateful midway to Manna. And as I was reading the chapter, it was talking about Moses and Aaron and how they had led the people out of Egypt. And the people had transitioned into a holding spot. And in the holding spot, they began to complain and murmur, and God saw their complaints. And so God called Moses up and He said, I'm going to release. God began to use His glory and release manna from heaven. And the people were still stuck in that mindset that they wanted to look back out of a place that God has already delivered them from, because they felt that it was better. But God was wanting them to move forward into His promise that He is about to push them into. How many times have you begun to look back thinking that it was better back then, when God is pushing you to greater? So I want to encourage you to be grateful midway to manna. When I looked up the word manna is a supernatural food that God rained down from heaven to feed the chosen people, His chosen people, the children of Israel. And He released this food to sustain them in a desert place, in a dry place. God will sustain you in your desert where it looks like it's impossible. God will rain down His blessings to sustain you midway to the promise. So I want to encourage you to be grateful midway to manna. There are three principles that as I begin to dissect this word, that God wanted me to get to you. These three principles was: number one, God wants us to be grateful. He don't want us to complain and murmur, even in our well-doing, even as He's transitioning us to our greater place. God wants you to be grateful. The second principle that I noticed that God wanted us to realize in reading Exodus, the 16th chapter, He's constantly testing us. He's constantly testing your faith. Everything in your life has to happen to you, and God is constantly testing your faith so that you will not get stuck and you will not begin to think of those things that are old. And the third principle that God wanted you to realize is to always follow His instructions. God is always giving you instructions. He told Moses to tell the people to listen to His instructions. His instructions was they had to gather an adequate amount of this manna, and they had to be done with it at a certain time. There are certain things that God has given you to sustain you. God has given you certain instructions in this season, and you need to be done with that thing at a certain time. So God wants you to get busy. Don't complain. God is going to sustain you through this. You got to trust Him, because He's constantly testing you, and you got to follow His instructions. Go back to your instructions and look to see what God has already told you to do. The people were given instructions from Moses that came directly from God, and those instructions, what they had to be done with this food at a certain time, and they were hard-headed. They didn't listen, and guess what happened? God allowed maggots to come into the food. God will allow things to happen in your life because you are not listening to His instructions. Go back to the instructions. Be grateful, because God is constantly testing you. I just want to encourage you today to be grateful midway to manna, because you're going to enter into your promise. God has not forgotten you. You got to trust Him all the way through this process and know that all things are going to work for your good. I love you. Blessings and miracles. Until then, stay encouraged, because God is right there. He is about to blow your mind. Be grateful midway to manna.